I started looking at John chapter 4, the story of Lazarus that you all know. And I started looking at it because I wanted to know why Jesus did not attend to his friend's need right away. And I did this because, I don't know your background. I don't know where you guys come from. I come from a dysfunctional family. That's the term they call it. Families that don't function properly. And maybe you come from one of those too. I remember my dad was an alcoholic, and that's how I remember him. My mom had to come to the States to take care of Grandma. So I grew up without a mother for about 9 years. And I grew up with my dad. But my dad was never home because he was out drinking. So as a kid, you start thinking, well, wait a minute, why did God put me in this family? Why did he put me in? Because we tend to look at other families or other people, and we think that they are better off than we are, right? The term they use here, that the grass looks greener on the other side. But realistically, everybody is going through certain challenges and certain pains, and a lot of us don't even know because we try to put it off. We try to show something to the world that's opposite sometimes of what we're feeling inside. A lot of times we're broken, we're hurting, and we don't show that to people because we don't want people to know that. We want people to see the happy me, the nice me, but inside, we're hurting, we're longing, and we're asking the question, why? Why me? Why this family? Why this father? Why this mother? Or whatever question you might ask. And a lot of times, those questions become an obstacle to our growth. Because a lot of times we don't overcome them, and we're always questioning, if God loves me so much, and that's the reason, one of the reasons that I really started looking into this, okay? If God loved me so much, because the Word of God tells us, right, in John 3:16, for God so loved the world. If he loves me so much, why does he allow me then to go through this? Why does he allow me to be born into that particular family? And I started looking at this from that point of view. I wanted to know what Jesus' reasons were for not caring a little bit more for his friend, for not attending to his need right away, for waiting not only until he got worse, but until he died. And in the process, I discovered something that has been very, very inspirational for me and transformational as well. First of all, I would like to ask the question, in the Garden of Eden, I think we all go back and we say, what was the sin that was committed there? Well, that they disobeyed, right? Adam and Eve disobeyed what God had told them. He told them not to eat from the tree. They ate from the tree. But I want to challenge you to think of it this way, because what happened there was that the serpent comes and he tells them, so God told you couldn't eat from any tree. And no, they knew exactly what God had told them, and they repeated, no, God didn't tell us we couldn't eat from any tree. He told us we couldn't eat from that tree. So the question will be, when the serpent comes and he tells them, if you eat from the tree, God knows that you will be like God. I started thinking, so maybe the problem wasn't so much that they disobeyed, or they disobeyed because they really did not believe that they were like God. Remember, God made them in their image. And when the serpent comes and tells them you will be like God, it's like they couldn't believe it. And so the question becomes do we really believe that we are the image of God? And I think the problem starts there. And ever since then, we have thought of ourselves as inferiors. We have thought of ourselves that we cannot do anything right because, and then the devil comes and tells you you're good for nothing. God doesn't love you. Look at what family he puts you in. Look at the way you are. Look at the way you're living. And it comes to the point where you say, you know what, really, there's a lot of people that don't want to come into a church because they don't feel worthy. I mean, we don't come into the church because we feel worthy. We come to the church because the one that's worthy is here. And a lot of people feel this way and they say, I'm not going to go to church. You know, I don't live the way I'm supposed to. I don't do the things I'm supposed to. So I'm not going to walk there because I don't feel like I should be there. So what happens here? A lot of times we criticize the disciples a lot for their unbelief. We criticize the disciples a lot for being so stubborn. And I dare to say sometimes so dumb that we think they're so dumb. How can they do that? How can they not believe? After seeing all these miracles, how can they still be at the point where they are? But you know, this is what happens. And you have to understand that in the Old Testament, God manifested himself not as a person, but he manifested himself as signs, and usually as smoke. Fire coming from a mountain. That's the way the people knew God was there. They didn't see him. I think the only one that got close to seeing God and he only saw the back of God was Moses. But most people, what they saw, it was the manifestation of God through the signs that he gave of smoke and thunder and earthquakes and all this stuff. But nobody ever saw God. So the people knew that God was there because of what was happening in that mountain or in that place. The people knew that the Israelites knew that God was with them because there was a column of fire, or there was a cloud, or there was something there, but they never saw God. So you have to understand now, the disciples, the only thing they would have known about God is what their ancestors would have told them, the ones that lived in the Old Testament. This is the way God manifested himself. So when Jesus comes, and Jesus starts doing this crazy stuff we call miracles, John calls them signs, the disciples are going, what's going on here? They have never seen anybody do this stuff. They had never known anybody to be able to open somebody's eyes that was blind and now they can see. They were never able to see somebody to come up and tell you, you know what, you're lame, you can't walk, get up and walk. They never saw that. So that's why it was so hard for them to understand who Jesus was. Now I go back to my story, and you can go back to your story. So when you're living this type of life, this dysfunctional life, this life in sin, and somebody comes and tells you, hey, there's somebody that can change you. There's somebody that can transform you. There's somebody, like we were singing, can heal you. There's somebody that can do this stuff for you. You know, and you start wondering, really? Can somebody actually do something for me? Can somebody actually transform my situation, my lifestyle, my past, my present, and my future? And we start wondering, and we start even asking ourselves if that person can do it for me. And when they tell you that person is Jesus, you know, how many have known Jesus all your lives? I mean, I've known Jesus. I went to the Catholic Church, and I knew who Jesus was. I mean, they teach you, right? You have you have the nativity scene, and they tell you that's Jesus there. So we all have a concept of who Jesus is. We all know who Jesus is. But even though we know, or we have a concept of who was, we never understood who he really was, or who he really is. And that's why Jesus goes to his disciples and asks them, who do people say that I am? And they start telling them all this stuff. But the question that comes then is, who do you say that I am? So I want to pose that question to you today. Who do you say Jesus is? Because now In the story, I saw Jesus as a Jesus that did not care about his friend. But you know, when I started studying this and I started seeing this, I looked at the word, because remember, Jesus told his disciples that this miracle was not going to be unto death, but it was going to be for the glory of his Father. When I started looking at this word, doxa, which means glory in the Greek, there's about 35 different definitions that are given for this word in the Old Testament. Some of them are weight, heaviness, worthiness, reputation, honor. This is the word that describes a person that has what? That has wealth, that has power. Okay? This person has a reputation. This person is worthy. This person is heavy. His influence is very heavy, has weight because he has power and influence. So what happens? The one word that is used the most, though, in the Old Testament is to describe the glory of God. And understand something. The glory of God is different from the glory of men, because you can take the glory from a man and they will still be men. So if you're rich and they take away your riches, you still continue being you. I mean, you're a poor you now, but you're still you. But you cannot take the glory of God and God is going to continue being God. Because God cannot live without his glory. You can't separate him. That's why in the New Testament he says he does not even share his glory with anybody. God cannot be God if he doesn't have glory. That's why the world, that's why the heavens, they proclaim the glory of the Lord. You cannot separate God from his glory. So this word, the glory of God in Greek is doxa tau theo. It's a translation of a Hebrew word, which is kabod Yahweh, which refers to the presence of God made visible through deeds of power. Okay? So the glory of God is made visible through the deeds of power. And like we were saying, in the Old Testament, those deeds of power was smoke and fire and earthquakes and all this stuff. But in the New Testament, what happens? Jesus comes, and Jesus is what? The visible presence of God in this earth. And when he comes, he starts doing the things that only God could do. Because in the book of John, it tells us that God came to what? To show that Jesus was the Messiah, the promised, the Son of God. So when Jesus comes here, and he starts performing these miracles that only God was able to do, everybody freaks out, including his disciples. His disciples even got to the point where, if you remember, there was a big storm. And the boat was about to capsize, and they were screaming and yelling. And the only thing Jesus came to do was, he said a couple words. Be still. And what happened? There was peace. When the disciples saw that, they said, what kind of man is this? Who's able to do that? Who can tell nature, who can tell a storm to be quiet and it would obey, it would listen? They start understanding that the visible presence of God was with them. But they couldn't understand it because they were not used to it. Because the way that God manifested himself wasn't the way that this guy was doing it. Because this guy was doing it in a personal way, in a person. So what happens? When Jesus is here in the 4th chapter of John, verse 11 and on, this is the 7th sign that Jesus performs in this book, in this miracle book. He had done 6 before. This is the 7th sign. And as you know, number 7 means perfection. It's the number of God. This is the climatic sign that he's going to perform so that his disciples understand that he is God. That he is the Messiah. That he's the one they were waiting for. So he's building up this. And then here, when I went to look, then I realized that the most important lesson is not that Lazarus was raised from the dead, but instead that his illness and more so his death were in the interest of the glory of God. You know, I started looking at this because to see the glory of God may not be easy to understand. And that might be the reason why the Israelites in the Old Testament and the disciples in the New Testament have such a hard dealing with that fact. If you really come down to it and you start understanding what the glory of God implies, because a lot of times we think the glory of God is this mystical light show that's going to come and it's going to descend on us and it's going to do something, make us feel tingling or something. But that manifestation of the glory of God, the visible God, a lot of times God allows, and I come back to the story, God allows, because, you know, in God's mind, I'm going to let Tony go through this life, live with this family, have this father, have these friends, have this life, so that he can see my glory. I said, what? How are we going to see the glory of God? How is God going to show his power and his mercy and his healing and his transformation if everybody's okay? The only way that we see the visible power of God in our lives is through the glory of that he does, but the only way we can see it is because we're in need. In the Old Testament, as they're leaving Egypt, the reason they saw the power of God was because they needed what? Liberation. They needed freedom. And the power of God, the glory of God was there with them. But if they had not needed that, then there was no need for the glory of God. So what I'm saying here is that, look, can you picture the two sisters of Lazarus worrying over his brother? Can you picture them crying? Can you picture them hurting? But yet God, Jesus, says, no, I'm going to wait. Because this has nothing to do with Lazarus, but it has everything to do with my Father's glory. So a lot of times, in order for the glory of God to manifest itself, somebody has to be in pain. Somebody has to be going through some trouble. Somebody's going to have to be suffering. You know what? We don't want to be those people. We don't. We say we want to see the glory of God, but we don't want to be in those situations. How are we going to see the power and the glory of God if we're okay? We can't. So the troubles that you go through a lot of time that God permits, that God allows, some suffering that goes to your life, he's saying, you know what? I am going to allow these people to go through this so that they can see my glory. But man, you know, a lot of times we even attribute that to the attack of the enemy. Oh, the devil's attacking me. Yeah, the devil is, it's not the devil. And that's why we have to understand. If we believe that God has control over everything, he is in charge even of our lives, or past, present, and future, then we have to understand that God has everything in control, and therefore everything that we're going through, in a way, well, if we don't, because we can mess it up too. Okay? I mean, we make decisions that have consequences. And I want you to understand that there's a difference. But it wasn't my fault to be born in the family that I was born in, right? That wasn't my choice. That wasn't a consequence of what I said I wanted to do. You know, I didn't want to come to this country, but they brought me to this country because I had no say. So I was here, couldn't speak the language, didn't know anybody, And then people start making fun of you because you don't know, you know. And I still am learning the language. I still have this accent that you guys call, right? I still have problems with the PH sound as an F, and I still have problems with some of the grammar that doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, you come to this country, and I didn't want to be here. You know, looking back now, and that's what I really want you guys to take this. Looking back now, I can see the glory of God. Looking back now at my dad being an alcoholic, I can see the glory of God. Looking back now, I can see the glory of God in the poverty that I used to live in. Looking back now, I can see what God was doing. And the way he was doing it, that I didn't like at that moment. That did not feel good. That I wanted it to be over. But now, I understand, you know, it seems like we all have these episodes where God said, you know what? No, wait a minute. I'm going to take care of you, but wait. I'm going to do it in my time. I'm going to do it when I'm good and ready. Because, you know, even though the sisters came to, made a petition for him to go, he is not going to do something just because somebody asked. He has a purpose already. He has a will for us. He has a plan that he strategically has put together, and he's going to carry it through. And he's going to allow us to be part of it. But a lot of that plan, we're not going to like. Because sometimes, in order to see the glory of God, we have to die. We have to die. We have to die to me, to what I want to do. And allow him then to live through me. And who likes dying? Who wants to die to see the glory of God? You know, if you really ask the question that way, it even seems, it contradicts itself, right? Who wants to die to see the glory of God? Well, how am I going to see the glory of God if I'm dead? But you have to remember, we're not dealing with just anybody. We're dealing with Jesus. And this is the one thing that a lot of times as the Church of God, we miss. Because we cannot comprehend, how is he going to do this? How is he going to work this? How is he going to change this? How is he going to... We don't understand because we're thinking on what we are able to do. On the resources that we have. But he has unlimited resources. There's no impossibilities for him. He can do anything and everything he wants just by speaking the word. And a lot of times we forget, and sometimes we get into situations where we say, no, this cannot be. This cannot be God. God wouldn't do this to me. Yes, he would. Yes, he would. Why does he do it to you? Because he loves you. And again, how is it that if he loves me, he's doing this? Who has ever hit their kid? Okay, who has ever wanted to hit their kid? And I remember telling my son, and he still reminds me, I'm going to hit you because I love you. Right? Don't we say, because I love you, that's the reason I'm going to hit you. Now, you tell that to a kid, and he says, no, if you love me, you wouldn't hit me, correct? And we all went through that. Because it doesn't make sense. How can you love me if you're going to hurt me? Well, I hope you don't hit him too hard, but you know. And that's the same thing that happens here. A lot of times, if we want to see the glory of God, it's going to hurt. And it's going to hurt because God is showing us a process. God is putting us through this process so that we understand who he is. And a lot of times, the only way we are going to understand who he is by going through this process. Now, Mary didn't understand it. Martha didn't understand it. And I'm sure that Lazarus didn't understand it either. How? Why? That's why when Jesus came, if you would have been here, my brother would still be alive. If you would have come earlier, he wouldn't have died. Because look, they did believe that Jesus could heal him. They did believe that. But they had a hard time believing that Jesus could raise him from the dead. And now, if you ask the question, what has more power? What would show God's glory even more? To heal somebody that is sick from a fever or to raise somebody from the dead? When would God receive the most glory? Right? And sometimes God wants to receive more glory in our lives. So it has to be prepared in such a way, not because of what you're going through or you're suffering, it's because Jesus wants to give his Father the most glory. And sometimes the most glory is the more painful one. Now I can see that my initial thought about this passage was a description of our contemporary culture. When humans try to focus on pleasant conversation, but work hard at avoiding the painful situations. If it feels good, do it. If it sounds good, do it. Everything that's pleasant, we have no problem. But when you talk about suffering, suffering is not an attractive term in today's world. Who wants to suffer? Who wants to go through pain? No one. The culture of poverty does not apply so much to this country. You go to other countries and the culture of poverty or the theology of poverty, they know it well because they live it every day. They're persecuted. They're tortured. They're killed. They have to trust in Jesus in the situations that they're put in. And a lot of times they're not good. That's why we call them third world countries. What does that mean? I don't know. But basically, third world countries are countries that are not as developed. They're not suffering. These first world countries are not suffering as much as the third world countries. So suffering for us is a new term, it seems. We're not used to that. It's not something that is common. We try to avoid it as much as possible. But the one thing that Jesus tells his disciples is, whoever wants to follow me, you have to first deny yourself, and then you have to come. And denying ourselves is painful because I'm losing control of what I want to do, what I like, what I want to feel. And I'm allowing God, then I'm giving him the freedom to do whatever he wants with me. And that is a scary thought. That's very scary. So a lot of the terminology that is used, we have to really think. I come from the South, so for me, when they tell me that everything's going south, when everything's going bad, this is the terminology we use is what? Man, everything's going south. So everything south is bad? I don't know how you take it, but that's the way that it's perceived sometimes. The north is good, the south is bad. So if things are going bad, they're going that way. And south is usually what? Down, right? Anyway, I don't want to go into that. But there's a lot of things that I believe that if we really allow God, if we really want to see the glory of God in our lives, we're going to have to allow God then, or give him permission to put us through situations where we're going to be able to see that. That's why you wonder why these countries that are persecuted, the gospel explodes. I mean, instead of people getting afraid, they become more bold. You know, you have these places where people are getting killed, but yet people are opening churches and people are coming to Christ, even if they know that they might die for that. And people go and they continue preaching the gospel without any problems. They don't really care. I shouldn't say don't care, because I think everybody cares to keep their life in a way. But the gospel becomes more important than even their own lives, because they understand that if you give your life, you will then have life, right? But if you keep your life, you're not going to have life. So they understand this concept. So these countries, they're exploding with the gospel. Yet here in the U.S., what's happening? Church attendance, belief in God is going what? We want to see the glory of God. I think the church wants to see the glory of God. But we want to see the glory of God that feels good. The glory of God that makes me, wow, have an experience. You know, when I had an experience, I really felt, because remember, the glory of God is not about feelings. It's not about what I feel, what I don't feel. And the problem with today's culture, especially the young people, they want to be entertained. They want to come and they want to feel something, right? When they go to the movies, they want to get impressed. They want to feel the movie. Man, that was a good movie. Why? Because it made me feel good. When they listen to music that makes them what? That makes them feel good. So when they come to church, they want to hear something that makes them feel good. But when you talk about suffering, and you talk about pain, and you talk about sorrow, and you talk about the possibility of God putting you through there, oh, no, this is not of God. But I just want to tell you this morning that if we really want to see the glory of God, then we need to be ready for whatever God wants to do so that we're able to see that. Lazarus died. The sisters cried. Okay? But at the end of the story, if we allow Jesus, even though there's no hope, even though they couldn't believe anything good was going to come out of this, even though they didn't see how is, Jesus already knew how God's glory was going to manifest itself. He already knew. And he already knows what he's going to do with me and with you. He already knows exactly how he's going to show you his glory. He already knows it. We don't know it. And sometimes that's the problem, right? That we want to know, but we don't. But he already knew. He already knew that he was going to go over there and they were going to move the stone and he was going to say what? Lazarus, come out. As soon as Lazarus comes out, okay, or jumping like a little worm, that's the glory of God. People said, oh, wow. Even the sisters. But they had to go through the whole process. So what I'm telling you is that Jesus already knows how he's going to demonstrate his glory to your life and my life. It doesn't matter what kind of life you had or what kind of life you lived. It doesn't matter for him. Okay? Because I think he has a purpose. And once we become a new creature and have that new life, then the new life starts right there. He says, okay, I'm going to do this with you. I'm going to use you this way. You're going to be doing this. You're going to be doing that. And he already knows where you're going to be. He already knows what you're going to be doing. If we only allow him and give ourselves to the process that he has for us. So that one day we can say, wow, I can see the glory of God in my life.